Hello again, everyone. This is Alyssa Klein, the VRS Transition and Pre-Employment Transition Services Specialist. And with me today is
Ann Mackliffe, VRS Training and Development Specialist. And we also have
Sarah Sundin, Rehabilitation Program Specialist on the Community Partnerships team.
welcome to our Pre-ETS training for VRS providers, module number 2, which will help you learn the pre-ETS definitions and titles that are on your contracts. Here is the agenda for this training module. First, we'll review a desk aid, which has services, types, and titles. Next, we'll review definitions of the 5 pre-ETS required services, services in support of pre-ETS, and other possible services that may be listed on your contracts. So we'll start out by reviewing some background information that will be helpful throughout this training and going forward in providing pre-ETS services. If you haven't already done so, you might want to pause this video and print out this handy desk aid, which lists all the pre-ETS definitions that are on professional and technical contracts. Note that there are 2 sides to the document. We will refer to this document throughout the training. And before going further on this document, we thought it would be important to ensure all of you understand how VRS authorizes for services. Whether it is a pre-ETS service or another general VR service, there is always a service type and service title listed on the authorization. For pre-ETS, the 5 required services are all service types. So for instance, on the desk aid, you will see pre-ETS job exploration counseling listed in the blue box. That is the type. Then right underneath, you will see that for this service type, there is just one service title, which in this case is Job Exploration Counseling Services. Many of the pre-ETS services have just one service type, title, but pre-ETS work-based learning has 3, which we will explain later. This slide shows where you will see the service type and title on the authorization. You will also want to know which pre-ETS services are on your agency's professional and technical contract with DEED VRS. You can click on the link here to find your contract. And once you have that open, you can scroll down till you find the pre-ETS required services listed as it shows in this example. You will see that only service titles, not types, are listed on your organization's contract. So let's look at all of the pre-ETS services that are possibly on your organization's contract, and we will start with pre-ETS Job Exploration Counseling. Pre-ETS Job Exploration Counseling is the first item on the desk aid. When you receive a referral for this service, it can include helping students to explore their interests, the labor market, in-demand industries and occupations, non-traditional employment options, and or to identify career pathways of interest. The next pre-ETS type on the list is pre-ETS Post-Secondary Education Counseling. Once again, there's just one service title, which is Post-Secondary Education Counseling Services. There are actually 2 parts of the definition for post-secondary education counseling services. The first part is about helping students to enroll in post-secondary education counseling or training, post-secondary education or training. It includes understanding how to successfully transition to a post-secondary education or training program, to identify post-secondary education and training options, to understand how a student's career goals line up with education and training options, to complete steps for enrolling in a post-secondary education or training program, to learn about and apply for post-secondary financial aid options such as the FAFSA, and to learn about various supports and assistive technology used by students with disabilities at college, such as where and how to get alternative formats of textbooks. The second part of the definition is about the support that can be provided to students who are in a post-secondary education or training program in order for them to remain enrolled. Note that the services are quite narrow. They are about learning about course offerings and career options to their training program in order for them to ensure that they are on the right career pathway. It can also be about helping them to make decisions about changing majors or programs if they feel that their current program is the wrong fit. As I noted on the last slide, the services that can be provided within Pre-ET's post-secondary education counseling to students who are already enrolled in a post-secondary education program are narrow. And this slide clarifies that further. Keep in mind what was emphasized in the first training module. Pre-ETs are meant to be early services that are about exploration. With post-secondary education counseling services, that means these services cannot include providing extra supports to a student in order to be successful in a post-secondary education program. So things such as keeping track of their calendar, navigating projects, ongoing work with the disability services coordinator, etc., is not included. So VRS does fund for those supports, however, but those are within the general VR program, not within Pre-ETs. So if a potentially eligible student needs those extra supports, they could consider applying for the general VR program. And now I'm going to hand it over to Anne.
So let's move on to the third Pre-ETs required service, workplace readiness training. Workplace readiness training, or workplace readiness skills, are also known as employability skills. For Pre-ETs, they include job search skills, soft skills, and independent living skills. They are all behaviors that are necessary for most jobs. On the other hand, however, we also want to emphasize an important caveat. The word readiness can be tricky, especially since the Employment First movement assumes that everyone is ready to work. And that is certainly true for the students we serve. In the context of Pre-ETs, though, we are helping students build skills where they have the ability to do so. If a student isn't able to build a particular skill, it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be able to work or aren't ready to work, of course. There is now just one title within the type of Pre-ETs workplace readiness training, which is Workplace Readiness Training Services. There used to be 4 service titles in this area, but they are now all rolled up into one. So Workplace Readiness Training Services can be any of the following. Benefit Information Services, which assists students to understand how their benefits work in order to help them with their career planning. Keep in mind that for Pre-ETs, there is a high-level overview of benefits and is general in nature when it's delivered. If a student needs more intensive assistance related to benefits, such as a benefit analysis, then that service can be provided to the students who are eligible for VR as a general VR service. The next type of service is independent living services or training. As a student in this area, we assist to help students understand financial literacy skills, communication, interpersonal skills, or other soft skills necessary for employment. Third is public transportation training. This is where we assist the student to understand how to use public transportation. And last is job seeking skills training. Job seeking skills training is which teaches a student the technique to prepare for, secure, retain, advance in, or regain competitive integrated employment. Next is instruction in self-advocacy. Self-advocacy is the ability to effectively communicate, convey, negotiate, or assert interests and/or desires, and to learn about self-determination. And self-determination is taking the responsibility for communicating one's needs and desires in a straightforward manner to others. Once again, there is just one title here, which is Instruction in Self-Advocacy Services. Instruction in self-advocacy services include arranging and providing opportunities for understanding the disability and its impact, learning about how to request accommodation services, supports, and assistive technology, mentoring opportunities that include peer mentoring, disability mentoring, group mentoring, or e-mentoring, learning about personal rights and responsibilities, and finally, participating in youth leadership activities offered in educational or community settings. As you referenced the type of mentoring programs in the other slide, as we saw those, here this slide just lays out the definitions for each type of mentoring listed here. So I'll give you just a second to look at that. And now I'll pass it on to Sarah.
The last of the 5 required pre-ETS services is pre-ETS work-based learning. Work-based learning is a common term used in educational settings and now with the VR program as well. It is an approach that uses the workplace or real work to provide them with skills that will help them prepare for future careers. Work-based learning can include opportunities within or during the school day, after school opportunities, and most ideally, experiences outside of the school setting. We want them to be in an integrated environment to the maximum extent possible, and that there is direct employer involvement. These are all the possibilities that can be included within the category of work-based learning. The items in red are those items that can be included on the contract with VRS, while the other items in blue are provided by schools or in other ways outside of our contracts. On the contracts, we have work-based learning split into 3 distinct titles. The first is introductory work activities, which encompasses career mentorship, informational interviews, job shadows, service learning, or workplace tour and field trips. The second is work experience services, and the third is work experience wages. We will go into each of these next. On this slide, and also on the desk aid, you will see the 5 possible activities included within introductory work activities. They are pretty self-explanatory, including career mentorship experience, informational interview, job shadow, service learning, and workplace tour or field trip. Work experience services in the title used when a referral comes to you to assist a student with obtaining and maintaining a work experience. You will see an important note that this service does not encompass work-based learning coaching services. If the student requires work-based learning coaching, which is essentially the same as job coaching, then it would be authorized separately. And only students who are eligible for VR can receive work-based learning coaches from VR. These are the 4 items that are included within work experience services. Number 1, first, the meeting for potentially eligible students, and when assisting a student in obtaining an intermediate job where the employer pays the wages, this includes developing the work experience placement plan. Here, you should note that an intake meeting is authorized for students eligible for VR. Number 2, develop and locate the work experience. Number 3, orient the student to the work experience. Learn who their supervisors are, understand their schedule, make sure they understand their work duties, finalize transportation to and from the work experience, ensure they have their uniforms, and ensure they know the expectations of the work experience. Number 4 is follow up and check in. with students and employers for the duration of the work experience. Follow-up frequency can be determined based on the individual's needs and discussed with the individual, the counselor, and the provider. There are 3 ways that VRS can authorize for work experience services. Number 1, if the student needs help in finding an intermediate job where an employer will pay the student's wages, this is the typical job placement process. We call this an intermediate job because it isn't the final job that VRS will likely help the student with. It is a stepping stone along the student's career path. VRS can authorize for up to 30 hours for community partners to help the student with their job search, then to orient them with the experience and follow up with them and the employer once they have the job. Number 2 is when the student is interested in a short-term work experience and the site still needs to be developed. This is when your agency will be paying the student a wage, which is also funded by VRS through the work experience wages, which we will cover next. VRS can authorize up to 20 hours for a community partner to develop a site, orient the student to the site, and then follow up with the student and the employer during the experience. And number 3 is when a student is interested in short-term work experience and the site is already developed. Again, your agency would be paying the student their wages funded through the work experience wages. VRS can authorize up to 10 hours for orienting the student to the set site and then following up with the student and the employer. Work experience wages goes along with the short-term work experience when your organization is the entity paying the student a wage with VRS funds. It covers the student's wages and an administrative cost that your agency takes on. The wage your agency would pay would be the same amount that any employee would make at that business in a similar entry-level position. The administrative cost would be 50% of whatever wage the students are making. Note that training module 5 will go more in depth into authorizing, reporting, and billing related to work experiences. The next section on the desk aid includes services in support of pre-ETS. This is what the section looks like. You will see that there are 2 service titles within services in support of pre-ETS: the pre-ETS intake and work-based learning coaching. These services are outside of the 5 required pre-ETS services, but VRS is able to use pre-ETS funds on these services. Note that only students who are eligible for VR can receive these services. The first is a pre-ETS intake. The fee for the pre-ETS intake is consistent statewide at $75 an hour. For potentially eligible students, we pay a first meeting, which is within the service time instead. And the second is pre-ETS work-based learning coaching. We will give more detailed definition of this service within Module 5 as well. But essentially, this service is the same as job coaching, only it is used to support a student to perform tasks assigned during a work experience. The last section of this training will review other possible services that could be listed on your contract. The other services include pre-ETS special programming and pre-ETS as general VR services. Pre-ETS special programming is an option for community partners that offer services that provide multiple pre-ETS services and/or have a rate that doesn't fit the consistent pre-ETS rate structure. Here's an example from one PT contract. This provider offers pre-ETS Exploring Employment class, and that class covers 4 of the pre-ETS required services. The cost of this service is $100 a day, and on the contract it notes that the authorization would be split evenly between the 4 pre-ETS services. Additionally, prior to contracts being amended, this question came up periodically. What happens if a student graduates and is no longer in a school, or if they turn age 22? All of which means they would no longer be eligible for pre-ETS. And yet they still need pre-ETS. Well, thankfully, we can all be happy, just like this guy, because as long as the young person is still eligible for VR, there are now general VR services that are compatible with pre-ETS services to be added on to contracts. If you look at the last section of the PREET's PT contract definitions desk aid, you will find a grid which crosswalks the PREET services with the compatible general VR services that can be on your contract. So keep in mind, however, that there are more restrictions on the general VR services as compared to the PREET services. Preparation time and site development are not allowed within general VR services. Furthermore, transportation is reimbursed at a separate line item. In VR general funds, it is $28 an hour. So that is the end of our first training module. As always, feel free to reach out to any of us in VR if you have questions related to PREET's and/or your professional and technical contract with VRS.